When we talk about 2020 politics, the focus is usually on the presidential election and North Carolina's role as a battleground state. But one statewide race is shaping up to be pretty interesting. At least a dozen people have said that they have plans to run for the lieutenant governor's job. That is, of course, the number 2 job in state government. Current Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest, as we know, is running for governor. The latest person to announce for the lieutenant governor's job is the current superintendent of public instruction. Carolina Journal is following all of these statewide races very closely. Rick Henderson is editor-in-chief and joins us now to talk about the latest developments. Hey, Rick.
Hi there.
So Mark Johnson, superintendent of public instruction, says he wants to continue to be an elected official, but he doesn't want a second term as superintendent.
Yes, and that's somewhat unusual because actually you could consider lieutenant governor to be a demotion from superintendent of public instruction because the lieutenant governor has almost no power in the state. The lieutenant governor has whatever power the General Assembly has given it, and it took most of those powers away when Jim Gardner was lieutenant governor about 30, 40 years ago. And so the lieutenant governor's job is largely symbolic. Now, of course, that person has the ability to serve as an ambassador, to be the acting governor if the governor's away and things like that. But the superintendent actually has a lot more authority. And so Mark Johnson's decision to do this is somewhat interesting. Now, people may think the lieutenant governor's job has a higher profile and is more important and all that, but in a lot of ways it really isn't. So it's sort of unusual that Johnson would choose that path rather than another term as superintendent. Then again, his tenure has not sat well with the education establishment and a lot of folks, and so maybe he's thinking that he might have a tough time getting reelected. Who knows?
Interesting. Now, he's not the only one. All sorts of people have decided that they're very interested in this particular seat, and that's curious in that, as you described, not much official power, but is it just that the person in the lieutenant governor's position can kind of fashion whatever job they want?
That has something to do with it. And of course, lieutenant governor has been the stepping stone to governor in several instances, especially when the governor could not succeed him or herself. Now, that's not an issue anymore. But, you did have the situation where Jim Hunt went from lieutenant governor to governor, where Bev Perdue went from lieutenant governor to governor. And Dan Forest is attempting to make that same step. But yes, it is something. Largely, it's a position that you can define your own job. It's helpful if the governor is of the same party, because that way you can, and we can talk about that in just a second, but that the governor, when Pat McCrory was governor, he actually gave Dan Forest a pretty big portfolio of things to do. And so that was useful. I mean, the lieutenant governor also presides over the Senate. And so if indeed we do have an evenly divided Senate, or a Senate where there are issues in play, then that vote can be very important. But we have a lot of people who are interested in it. On the Republican side, we have former U.S. Representative Renee Elmers of the Dunn-Lillington area. We've got State Senator Andy Wells of Catawba County and former State Rep Scott Stone interested in the job. And so we've got some big players who are interested in it.
And on the Democratic side, we've got at least 5 people that we know of who've said they would like this. We know that the official filing begins in early December, but several people talking about it, including a couple of state representatives.
Right. And also State Senator Terry Van Dyne from Buncombe County, who had an interesting statement. She was at an event recently in which she said that the role of the lieutenant governor is to essentially amplify the voice of the governor. Well, that's really handy when you're of the same party. If you're not, I mean, North Carolina is one of those states where the governor and lieutenant governor don't run as a ticket. And so in a lot of those states where the governor and lieutenant governor run as a ticket, the lieutenant governor really is an even more symbolic position than it is in North Carolina. This person is basically a ribbon cutter and a ceremony attender and that type of thing. But Van Dyne's statement was interesting because, for one thing, it shows that the Democrats are very confident they're going to take the governor's seat again, that Roy Cooper is going to get reelected. But it is an unusual role because the lieutenant governor, basically using the old joke, she's basically saying lieutenant governor's a potted plant. That's just simply somebody there to say, yay, governor, yay, what you're doing, good thing.
Well, I'll tell you what, if even a handful of the people who've said they're interested end up actually filing as a candidate, this will be an amazing primary in March to watch for this one.
It absolutely will. And for one thing, it will mean that there will certainly be openings in a number of state legislative seats that aren't there currently. The Renee Elmer's role in the statewide race, I mean, it's interesting. I guess it's a strange 6 degrees of separation, but Renee Elmer's defeated Bob Etheridge, who was the superintendent of public instruction, and now she's running against the current superintendent for public instruction. So I mean, it's a
small world.
It's a very small world. Yes.
So, Rick, with Mark Johnson saying, nope, not going to seek a second term as superintendent of public instruction, I'm going to look at the lieutenant governor's race, that has now opened up a whole lot of speculation about, okay, who will file to try to seek the superintendent's job?
Right. And there are 2 very prominent Republicans who have stepped forward. One is Representative Craig Horn, who's, I believe, from Union County, I think, who's who's one of the top education policymakers in the General Assembly. Also, Catherine Truitt, who was an advisor to Governor McCrory, but is the chancellor of Western Governors University in North Carolina. 2 people who have, I think, somewhat similar views about a lot of issues dealing with educational choice and the like, but have very, very different backgrounds and experience. I mean, that's going to be a very interesting race, because you have someone who has a lot of experience in the legislative side with education and someone who has a lot of experience on the administrative side with education. And so, I mean, it's going to be a fascinating race. Chris Malone, former Wake County School Board member, has also said he's interested in running. The only reason he is of interest at all probably is because he is from Wake County and he has been elected from Wake County, but Catherine Truitt lives in Wake County too, and so that's it. But the Republican race will be very interesting. And on the Democratic side, it's basically going to be, let's unravel all the reforms that the Republicans have made in the General Assembly over the past 10 years and go back to having the North Carolina Association of Educators run everything.
You know, this particular position is always fascinating because of the continual strife, it seems, and disagreements about who runs, and I use that word in quotes, who runs education in North Carolina. And so one has to wonder, would it be any different, perhaps, if Roy Cooper, a Democrat, is reelected and a Democrat wins the superintendent's race? Maybe they would be more simpatico on their views about education, but it could just be lining up to be more strife. Yeah,
I mean, it's always possible, but then again, we have to remember that not so long ago, about a decade ago, there was a fight between 2 Democrats about this, the then Governor Bev Perdue and the then Superintendent June Atkinson, over who actually controls management of the schools. And it went to court, and the courts actually said that the superintendent is the chief policymaker and the chief administrator for the public school system. Bev Perdue tried to appoint her an education czar and basically take all of Atkinson's authority away. So it's not necessarily something that is a partisan issue, but one of philosophy and of the roles of public schools, private schools, alternative types of schools, alternatives to traditional schools. It's a big issue.
Rick Henderson is editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. Rick, I know that CJ is going to be all over these statewide races, the primaries as well as the general, profiling the candidates, taking a look at the big issues in the races. So we await the official filing. Once we know who's actually in the race, we will look forward to all of that coverage. Rick, where can folks find Carolina Journal and you on Twitter?
CarolinaJournal.com is the web address. I am at Deregulator on Twitter.
Rick, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Stay with us. Much more Carolina Journal Radio to come in just a moment.